All right, there's a few different things that you're going to be covering, especially when you first get started. Event coverage. You'll be going to a lot of different speeches and meetings and lots of different news conferences during your time. Get used to it. They're always doing stuff like this. This is the good bit of coverage in news, especially when you first get started. Why? Because these things are usually a little bit easier to cover. It's a little easier to put a story together, and they want you to make sure that you know how to put a story together. So you'll usually get to go to a lot of speeches, a lot of events, such as meetings and news conferences. I can't tell you how many of those I've been to through all three of them. Get used to things like what's called BOPSA, BOPSA. It's a little acronym, a bunch of people sitting or standing around. That comes from a television standpoint because when you're trying to get good footage of these meetings, it's basically the same things. There's only so much you can do with a bunch of people sitting or standing. You're trying to get a lot of different shots, but it's basically the same thing. You can only get so creative. Plus, you've got a meeting there, and they could be getting people's way, and that's another aspect of it. So, but get used to it. That's all part of it. Basically, if you've got a speech, remember a speech is there's a special person who of some interest. They're coming to talk about something very specific. It could be a political candidate. It could be a person of from an educational background, whatever. Remember, they're coming in with a speech, and there's not going to be any real pushback times in those kinds of things. It's usually a friendly crowd for the most part. It can pop up that things happen at speeches, and then you have to be able to roll with the punches and acclimate to that. But for the most part, you're not going to get, and there's usually not any interaction with that. It's not a press conference. They get to say what they need to say, and people, yay, they applaud, and there's a program to it, and it's very, very well produced for a speech. And then you always try to get either before or after. You want to get an interview one-on-one with them. To really, you're going to use some of the stuff they say in the speech, but maybe you want to try to get deeper information. You want to go a little deeper in with your story. There's other aspects to that story. Maybe there's some other thing that you want to talk to them about. And you're only going to get the information and this quotes by having that interview with them either before or after. So that's really important to remember. Yeah, you're going to get a lot from the speech, but if you just take from the speech, it's not going to be enough. You need to get into some sort of an interview with them one-on-one so they can answer your questions directly. And then also don't forget there are people there. It's important to get the person giving the speech, get their interview, but you also have to get people that were there, person on the street, interviews and see what their reactions are. That's an imperative part of any of this. It's having more input, more quotes, more opinions, more reactions from a few more people to react to what they're saying. You don't want just that person talking. You want to kind of get a feel of the room of whatever the thing is. It's always different. It depends on the speaker. It depends on the topic. And you got to, like I said, you got to take it as it comes. You got to play it by ear. But those are things you absolutely have to do when you're going to a speech. Don't just depend on the speech itself. Get an interview with the speaker, whoever is talking, so you can get with lots of other questions, and then talk with people in that room. My thing it would be if just know if you have an interview with him or her afterwards, depending on who you're talking to. I would have the speech. I would interview more people before the speech. regular people, and then maybe, because chances are those other people are probably going to be gone pretty quickly, especially, and if you've got a speech with that person afterwards, you're really not going to find anybody there. Very, very few people afterwards. So because people just clear out very quickly. Just a little tip from my experience. Also, meetings. These usually, and a lot of times when I talk about meetings, they're usually legislative type of meetings or committee kind of meetings. And they always have that. They might not necessarily be a legislation or city council meeting. There's lots of city or county or some sort of committee meetings for any number of public interest things going on. But one thing they do always have is an agenda. Sometimes the agenda is put out a few days in advance. Sometimes it's put out 24 hours. Figure out the rules of what that is. Understand that. Everything is always different. Because sometimes the meetings aren't very eventful. They're not very exciting. But sometimes there's events and topics that come up. And that are very interesting to the area and lots of people, and taxes could go up, or there's a new law, or heck, I saw a big to do about stop signs. They were cutting them out of stop signs on one street in Harrisburg, and a lot of people came out to say, yeah, we don't want to do that. Because they were cutting like the stop signs in half instead of every block having a stop sign. They wanted to cut it in half for more traffic, and lots of people didn't want that. So I mean, this, these kinds of events and these kinds of things bring out a lot of people. So you want to make sure you have your agenda and you understand what the agenda is, what's on there, what's going on. Also, you want to get information on the main items in there. So you have to really listen very well. Have some sort of electronic recording device, because there's only so much you can get with your own hearing and kind of with writing stuff down, which you will still do. But if you're a recording device of some sort, you can see at what time somebody said something. As you're writing it down, you can write a time of when a certain quote came up that you really liked. So that's absolutely imperative, be it either an audio recording or a video recording, depending on what you're doing. So you're going to get as much information as you can from that meeting. And then once again, that goes back to the whole interview aspect. See if you can talk to someone before or afterwards about it. And then the same rules apply too with getting people's public opinion as well. So you might talk to the people who are in charge of the meeting, but also the same rules apply because you're trying to get as much information, opinions from the people who are in charge of these meetings, and then the public reaction, because it's people who are affected by these actions in these meetings. And then get good quotes, and you'll know a good quote. Part of getting a good quote is being prepared, all that stuff that you're doing before, the research and stuff like that, and listening to what is said. And as you're listening to what is said, naturally, questions will start forming in your head. As you're talking to people in interviews, you're going to have your standard questions that may have not been asked, or topics that might not have been brought up in there. Those are questions that you have to make up, and you have to think pretty quickly on the fly when you're doing this. So how do you get good quotes? A lot of times getting a good quote is simply knowing how to form a good question. Lots of times, there's old standards I always use, depending on what I'm kind of getting. Because when I'm interviewing, I either have my informational questions that I need, or there's questions I want to see if I can get a good quote out of someone. And that comes with time, and it depends on depends on the situation. I can't give you a cookie cutter thing. And you'll see it, and the only way you'll see it when you're out there, when you're doing this. It's so how to get a good quote. Getting a good quote is how you form that question. It's and how you form the question and how good a speaker the person you're talking to is. All right. Yeah, if you're dealing with adults, usually it's fine. I love kids. Just to let you know, kids are terrible for getting good quotes. Usually, I'm talking like less than 18. Um, and it's because it's just the way their brains aren't developed enough. I'm not being biased in this. It's just the way it is. It's like, yeah, I liked it. Yeah, it was good. That's why think about how many news stories you watch on television, and the only time the kids usually say don't say too much, or if they have a bite in there, it's a setup with their narration before it. And what does little Jimmy think of this? This is awesome. It happens all the time because they can never really put enough for what you want for a good quote. But that's kids. Adults don't have doesn't happen as often as much, especially when it's people who are in charge of these meetings. Sometimes you might find it a little more difficult when you're talking to the person on the street. That to get those that can be frustrating sometimes. And but you'll start to get an eye and ear and take a look at certain people, see how they react, and um, pick up what they're listening, how they talk and stuff. You'll be surprised, and that's why it's so important to be so observational. You have to be able to watch a whole lot and listen a whole lot, and see what's going on in a short period of time when you're doing these things. You can't ignore things. This is another reason I say pay attention. That's why I ask those stupid questions, those stupid bonus questions. I don't care if you know stupid garbage about me. Are you paying attention? Paying attention to little things. Paying attention to this. I always said it makes you better. It makes you better with this, and it makes you better in general in person, so you know what's going on around you. Gathering quotes. So you're going to be some times when you get into a meeting of some sort and you don't know who anybody is. You have four people there, and I saw in the book what they said to do, and they put a table sketch there, and it's on page 125. And we got red shirt, you got beard guy, you got ponytail and blue tie. And these were four people that didn't know who. You better know their names before you leave there, especially if you have interviews with some of these people. But when you don't know, and say you're just coming up into it, and you don't know who is who, which will happen a lot. I didn't even realize. No one told me to do that. That made me laugh and chuckle when I looked at these helpful hints. That's just something I kind of did naturally. Hey, there's beard guy, or hey, there's red, or there's just whatever. There's some aspect of it, so you have some sort of reference to know who's saying what. It really does work. Make sure like I said, make sure you get those names, first and last names, and their titles spelled properly. Know who everybody is before you leave there. Like I said, you'll probably talk to at least some of those people if you're doing your job right. So it's a little trick they said to use. I didn't even realize they actually wrote this down. I was surprised. Hey, I do that. So yeah, it works. It does, because there's going to be times you have no clue who these people are. All right. So just another little trick when you're getting interviews and gathering quotes, and because it happens. All right, news conferences. I've been part of so many news conferences. It's crazy, both in the professional field and then working with the city of Harrisburg. So I've become very familiar with press conferences. They are very organized. Just know that there is a specific reason for that press conference a lot of the times, and there's a certain event, or there's a certain policy there, or something, or some person has either done something good or bad, and they have to have a press conference or a news conference about it. I mean, it could be in nature of it's always a little different, but for them, it's a controlled environment. In an event, they want, and they realize they what they're doing, and a lot of times is they're giving the opportunity for the press to come, and so we can talk to them. Sometimes it's heavily attended, sometimes it's sparsely attended. It depends on the story, and that just makes sense. And you do have all those sources there. It is very organized, and sometimes. Yes, they'll have whatever they're talking about. They'll have their professional statements and what they want to talk about, and they'll have specific people who will talk, and it's all once again it's all planned. And then usually what they'll do is, okay, is there any questions? You'd be surprised how many times. Sometimes, yeah, there's lots of different questions that are coming from different people, from different media sources that relate to that story or whatever the event is. Just know that you're gonna, what you should do is pay attention to what they're doing. And there also might be another aspect or another story, or an aspect of the story that you've heard about that you don't want everyone to know about, like an exclusive story. And this is an important time to say, oh, can I talk to you afterwards? I have something I want to talk to you about. So you can get the exclusive part of that, because you may not want other sources to hear about that. So keep that in the back of your mind. And just know that there are some aspects that are negative. Everyone's basically getting the same story. There's only so many different ways you can do a news conference. You're all basically getting the same amount of information. It depends on who that journalist is, who they're covering, what they're covering, what questions they may have asked during the press conference. Sometimes a lot of you are going to have the same questions. And, that question got asked by this person. This question got asked by that person. During the press conference, they put out enough information that these are questions that you would have asked, but they got answered because they already presented to you. That goes part and parcel with what we're doing. So a lot of people getting the same story. To make it different, it depends on the angle you take. Is there another angle to take? Sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's just a news conference. There's lots of boring news conferences. How many things? Oh, we're going to have a news conference for the Capona Festival. It's the festival in Harrisburg every year during Labor Day. It's a very big festival. I covered that. We had a news conference for that. I had videos for that. I covered that. I went and shot stuff for the. It was all promotional for the. That was my more promotional stuff for the city of Harrisburg, because that's what I was working for at the time. But that's not. But people came to it, and they had sponsors there, and they had people outside there, outside of City Hall, doing some stuff that was going to be featured at the festival. So there's only so much you can get with that. Sometimes it's a different topic, and there's a lot of questions out there. It could be a hot news story, and that's a different animal. Source dictates where the story goes. That goes on where you, if you have other information. Is there another angle to it? That's what I was talking about. Maybe you want to talk to them afterwards. And also, it's what can be a snow job. A snow job is, we have to get out in front of this. Something really bad has happened. And how many times you see press conferences with, we are very confident in this person that they didn't do this terrible thing, and then it turns out that they did, but they had to get out in front of it and put on a good face, and it's your job and sometimes it's easy to figure out, sometimes it's not, and then shortly after you find out that person might have done all those things, and you're going to get lots of news conferences like that, and sometimes you still have to go. Why? Because that person who's up in the news is talking about it, and you have to be there. And it all depends. It all depends on the story, where the story's at, what's going on, and still being fair, and still being, being balanced out there. But once again, it comes with it. I can't. There's so many things I could tell you, but I can't just. You have to go through it. I can tell you so much, but until you've been through that pacing and what is the craziness every day, I can only tell you so much. There's some parts you have to get through, and you're gonna You're gonna be like, holy cow! How many times that someone after I try to tell them this stuff, and they would believe me, but then they get in, they graduate, and then they go out and it's like, oh my god, oh my goodness, you weren't kidding. Yeah, I was like, you were so right about this. I'm like, yeah, I was like, and so they were more prepared, I guess, from being telling them, but it doesn't really. It still hits you. It still hits you because it's reality, and you realize, how am I able to do this? How can I do this quickly? Sporting events. That's another aspect. You might, and even if you I don't want to necessarily go into sports. Well, you might have to cover sports because that's part of news. Because news and sports and covering sports and news, it's basically the same thing, or entertainment or whatever. It's all the same thing. You're doing the same exact processes. You're just covering different things. These are different. It's a different venue. It's different people. But it's still an event. You're still getting your quotes. You're still getting your things. So there's a lot of the same processes that you do when you're doing your news reporting. But there's some things that you have to, when you're doing a game story, especially going to a game, and how do I tell a story of that game? Well, there's certain aspects that go along with that. Score, obviously. You want who wins, who loses. And there's lots of times I would cover like basketball or football, and I was just supposed to get some highlights. And there's especially like if you think about Friday Night Football or basketball frenzies or whatever, and I'd only be able just get a quarter, and then here make sure you send hook somebody up with a contact number for us to give a final score, because they just needed some highlights of some footage of some good plays and some cutaways, because it's a sports cast, and though it might be a little bit longer in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of different games being focused on, and it's not that long. But they still need that score. So you hey, can you make sure here's a number, can you get that to us? And they usually were very, very, very easy to get that information from them. Sometimes I was there till the end, so I could give them the score. But it all depends. Maybe I had someplace else to go. So score is absolutely imperative. Atmosphere. Every game is a little different from when you early in the season. Not much has really been going on so far in the season. It's going to have a different feel as opposed to a playoff game, especially if it's a team that hasn't been in the playoffs a long time. So you're going to feel the buzz of that stadium. It's going to feel different. There's going to be an energy in the air, and you're going to be able to feel it. And that's part of when you're writing your stories. The descriptive aspect of it, when we're talking about the descriptive opening and descriptive thing, that's imperative. You have to be able to write descriptively, because that makes a better story, because you're trying to set the tone for that article and being able to feel that atmosphere. So there's a feeling to it, and you got to be able to write that. Records. Sports is all about lots of different records. The all-time home run record, or most touchdowns, or most goals in hockey, or most three-pointers in basketball, whatever the case may be. Whatever the records are, you have to have some sort of knowledge going into that game. Maybe there's some sort of record being broken that day, or it's imminent that someone's going to have to know that. History. It can be two teams that are terrible, but they have a huge rivalry with each other, or they're both terrible, and then whoever wins won't be the worst team in the league for that year. It's knowing the history of that kind of thing, so that gives more depth to that game story. There's so many different aspects. Statistics. Sports is all about stats. Where the records from. It's because of these compiled stats of they've scored this many points and this many goals, or whatever the case may be, or and it's who's doing better, or who it could even be that someone's so bad, or they're going to continue it. If someone's bad enough, they can take that in consideration too. Injuries. How many teams are flying high until their star player gets injured right in the middle of the game? And then is it just for that game? Is it for the rest of the season? That's a huge. That's always the injury. A big injury to a big star. It usually leads off the coverage. If you think about it, when it comes to the report on that game. Some other tips for event stories: understand why you're there. All right, understand what you're there for that story. Keep focused on it, but understand why you are there for that story and try to tell the best story possible. Improvise and adapt. That's why I was a little understand your purpose, but if something pops up, and sometimes they do, don't be so tunnel visioned that you can't adapt to that story. All right, still be able to produce a story what you're there for, and but if something big happens and some sort of news comes out of that that's totally different, you have to be able to switch, turn on a dime, and be able to roll with it. It's that's what a good reporter does and a good journalist does. Be able to adapt and be able to pay attention and say, hey, oh, I've got a whole other thing. Here's a whole other aspect to it, and it adds another layer to that story. And then look outside of the event. Sometimes when you're doing there, improvising and you're adapting, you find a better story. You went for some meeting, say with some legislative meeting, and you thought the big thing was going to be, oh, are they going to pass a tax hike of some sort here, and then some other thing that pops up. Oh, there's an accusation of with some credible evidence of some politician, might even be somebody on that city council. Say it's a city council meeting, and that pops up, or there's some other piece of it, or the water is in terrible shape or something, and whatever. You have to, and you see, hey, there's something else here. It goes back to improvise and adapt. That's part of being a journalist. It's imperative. You have to be able to have lots of layers, being able to be quick, observe, be able to adapt, turn on the dime, and be able to dig out other stories. Sometimes they are there, sometimes they're not. But if they're there, you have to be able to work on that other story. It's demanding. It's not easy. Instincts will get better with that. You'll figure things out as you go along. You'll have help along the way. People will be there for mentors for you. Don't worry, but that's all part of it. Beyond the standard events, there's lots of different things that could happen in these events. And what we're trying to do is basically from a local standpoint. All news is local, and they see things like they hit a few examples here in the book, and it's like an explosion demolishes an oil refinery 1,000 miles away from your town. What's okay? That's interesting, but how would that hurt the people locally? Well, think about it. Oil, that could bring gas prices up dramatically because you have less oil supply there. There could be some sort of it might be some sort of environmental issue. You never know. 1,000 miles away, is there clouds that go come over there, or maybe it affects the water, and maybe there's some river going downstream and it comes by you, and you don't know. How does it affect you locally? All news is local. They say a Chinese firm has received permission to build an engine that was previously constructed only in U.S. cities. That could have a good or a bad impact on your city and your local community, because maybe it might be taking jobs away. Maybe there was some sort of firm there or company there who was building something. A lot of people were employed by it, and those jobs are going to go off overseas. Or it could be the other way. This could impact you positively and have more jobs, or whatever they might be creating. They might need new, they might need some other piece of equipment for what they're creating, and your area makes that, and so that's a good news for them. So I mean, it's looking at the bigger pictures, these bigger things that seem distant, or you're talking about possible federal government things that happen. How does it affect you locally? So it's being able to understand that and go into and try and tell a story best as you can. All right. But besides these events, which are very rehearsed and professional and lots of times organized and a lot of times fluff, sometimes there are going to be times when you're going to be dealing with fires and crimes and terrible, terrible things. I've worked with lots of fires, lots of crimes. September 11th, TWA 800. That was in July 17th, 1996. A 747 crashed off the coast of Long Island on its way to France, and everybody died, and it was a massive disaster. So it's and you're going to have to be able to go and do your job and report. You have to stay calm. It's really hard. It's difficult sometimes because you're a human being. Now, what I'm about to say is, yes, still be human. Some people, what they do is they become robots. They become these uncaring monsters. And I shouldn't say monsters because it's a lot of times for a lot of people it's a defense mechanism for them to help them deal with the trauma that they see. Because a lot of times you're going to see really bad things. You're going to see dead bodies. You're going to see terribly beat up or just destroyed things, or you're just going to see things you don't normally get to see when you work in other fields and do other things and work those typical 9-to-5 jobs because you've decided to do this job. And so, yes, sometimes really bad things happen, and you're going to see some really bad things that most people don't see. You still have to do the job. You still have to be professional. But I always say, don't stop being human. Because the best way to tell a story is keeping your humanity, being able to give the proper respect, the proper emotion to the situation, as opposed to just, okay, I'm just doing this, getting this done, and it doesn't have the same heart. A lot of people who do that don't have the same heart. They're not going to get, if they don't seem as sympathetic in times. Sometimes they're not. And then you're not going to get the best story. So you have to stay calm in what you're doing. Yes, it's difficult, but this is your job. This is what we're going to do. Also, stay safe. Sometimes it could be floods, it could be fires and stuff like that. Certain things are blocked off for your safety. I'm going to go and get the great shots, or I'm going to get this. You can't stop me. I'm the press. Lots of times, especially at a fire, in fire scenes, what they'll do is they'll let you through, but they always have you off to the side. There's an area where you're allowed to be to get what you need. Just don't make sure you don't go too close. Crime scenes as well. There's certain areas you can go, certain areas you can't go. Just pay attention to those, respect those, because these are the people who can help you get your stories. Don't act like an idiot. All right, I can go here like I'm the press. And no, follow the rules, respect what they want, respect what they need, get what you need, and they'll work with you. They'll be very accommodating with you. And lots of times you can get an interview afterwards. Just know that waiting for that interview could take a while, could take a few hours, because they're working on whatever they're doing. Remember, what they're doing is more important than what you're doing. All right, these are emergency workers and first responders. What they're doing is more important. They allow you to get what you need to get, but follow the rules. Okay, it's important, and also stay focused. Focus is everything. I always say that. Stay focused with what you're doing in so many different aspects, but being focused, being calm, and being safe. remember, you got to keep these things in mind when you're out there. Certain of the elements to these stories, obviously, how many people died or how many injuries are going on, how much was lost from a damage standpoint. Sometimes you won't find. Take a few days to figure that out. Maybe they have it right away. Wouldn't count on that. Also, know who is involved in the story. Be careful. All right, don't start revealing, even if you find out certain information of who certain people are. Kobe Bryant, what happened there. And respect those certain things. But when it's okay, then release certain things. If you're talking about people dying or something like that. But it's important to know who you're talking to, and of course the sources who are going to be talking to. Know who they are. Know who might be the people involved if you can get that information. And usually, once again, that's talking to people, making connections, and sometimes they might just give you the information. Every situation is different. Just know that. You got to be flexible. All right. Just know that every situation is different. And of course, what happened? What happened in that event? If you break it down to these things, a lot of times these events, and if you notice in a couple of things that we've done, a lot of this was in there. All right, the big three. Be prepared, do your research, all right? Find your story. Find the story, where's the story, how does it affect, and why should the people that are reading, my audience, care? Okay, how does it affect them? And then, of course, be safe. Don't do stupid things. Don't go into dangerous areas. Make sure you pay attention. Be attention to detail. Don't have stories in your errors in your story, even spelling, sentence structure, stuff like that. Keep an eye on that. Factual aspects. Double check everything. All right, double check it. If you don't double check, you could be making a huge mistake, and you don't want to do that. All right. All right, that's all I got here for you today. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful. Just know next week I'll have another one for you. Okay? Please stay safe. Got a question, email me. Let me know. All right? We're getting there. We are getting there. All right? So keep working. Keep working at it. It's a tough time. We'll get through this. All right. Bye.